Hi, I'm Phil.
And I'm Lydia. We're the hosts of the Holy Earth podcast.
And on the podcast, we've shared some amazing stories of stewardship. And many of those stories are made possible by supporters like you.
This year, Latter-day Saint Earth Stewardship has cleaned up hundreds of pounds of trash, planted thousands of trees, and served over 1,200 hours across the world.
Your donation this Giving Tuesday will help these local projects to grow even more and help us empower even more people to feel that sense of awe and wonder in creation. So will you help us? Every little bit makes a big difference.
You can follow the link to donate today. Thank you.
There was a global survey that came out just 6 months ago. Not a US survey, it was global. And what they found globally is that the majority of people care and the majority of people don't think anybody else cares. Isn't that wild? And the reason for that is because we're not talking about it.
Yeah.
Normally, we talk about what we care about, right? So normally, people are like, oh, well, I know my friends care about X because this is what they talk about, right? But we self-silence on climate change because when we're worried about something but we don't know what to do about it, most people don't want to talk about stuff like that.
Welcome to Holy Earth, where we explore the intersection of faith and earth stewardship. I'm your host, Lydia Theobald.
And I'm your host, Phil Fernberg.
Our guest today is Katharine Hayhoe, one of the world's leading climate scientists and science communicators. This is so cool that she's on our podcast.
I'm so excited.
This is a huge deal. But first, we're going to bring in someone else that's also a huge deal, Brigham Leak, for our Stewardship Story segment. He is the Associate Director of Sustainability and Continuity at Brigham Young University. Hi, Brigham.
Hey, Brigham.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be with you.
It's great to have you. So, Brigham, you are a good friend of both the podcast and Latter-day Saint Earth Stewardship, the sponsor of our podcast, and we have been collaborating on a number of things with BYU over the years, and most recently, there was something called the BYU Stewardship Symposium, and we would love to have our listeners hear more about it. It just happened last weekend. Can you tell us about it and why people should know about what happened there?
Yeah, that was a week ago. I like this cadence. I think the three of us should meet up every week.
Yeah.
Last week was amazing. It was celebrating 20 years since the publication of a collection of essays by BYU's Religious Studies Center. And that collection of essays was called Stewardship in the Creation, LDS Perspectives on the Environment. George Handley, who has appeared on your podcast before, was one of the editors. A number of professors and professionals who were involved in that initial publication were involved in this stewardship symposium last week. So sort of a celebration of that landmark 20 years later. And we had scheduled presiding bishop of the church, Gérald Caussé, to come speak to us. This was thanks in part to the sustainability managers of the church. There are 2 sustainability managers full-time who report to the presiding bishopric. And Bishop Waddell had spoken at the U in previous years, announcing a major donation of water to the Great Salt Lake. Bishop Budge had spoken at Utah Valley University at a Sustainable Development Goal Conference. And the sustainability managers at the church said, it's BYU's turn. Let's get Bishop Caussé down to BYU in Provo and have him speak. So this, believe it or not, was scheduled for about 2 years. President Shane Reese, in his introduction of Bishop Caussé, stated that. So those of you listening who want a church leader to come speak at your event, book them several years in advance. President Nelson of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints passed away in September. Leadership shuffle, Dallin H. Oaks becoming new president. There was a vacancy in the quorum of the 12 apostles, and Bishop Caussé would now be Elder Caussé. And so that was about a week before our conference. And for a few days, we didn't know if Elder Caussé was going to be speaking to us or not. But we were very delighted that he came. And so he came to BYU and spoke. It was a hot ticket event, very hard to get into because it wasn't in our basketball arena. It was in a conference center on the north end of campus where most students don't get to. But the room filled up quickly and students were still beginning to arrive. And some of them were texting me, I can't get in. And we were seeing them slowly fill into the upper floors. So there was seating in kind of an atrium with Elder Caussé at a pulpit with a microphone. And you could look up to the second floor and the third floor. You could see students craning their necks and turning their ears to try and listen to the words of an apostle. It was really inspiring. It was a really lovely address. He talked about what the church is doing around earthly stewardship. So a number of priorities that the church has identified. I could give you a short list. And of course, this is all on the church's website called Caring for the Earth, which you can find. And then Church News has covered this. But adopt renewable energy, improve energy efficiency, conserve water, reduce, reuse, and recycle to avoid material waste, reduce transportation emissions, sustainable design and construction, sustainable agriculture and ranching. And there's a new 8th priority, which is adapting to climate risks and improving resiliency. And we take a similar approach here at BYU, where resilience is a big part of the sustainability work that we do. So talked about what the church is doing, talked about what church educational institutions are doing, BYU Hawaii, large solar renewable energy effort happening there. Talked about BYU's recycling and composting efforts. And I thought it was really touching that he paused and recognized the employees who go around and gather the cardboard or gather the food waste and turn those into resources that we can use here on campus. It was a really beautiful event, and it's been helpful for us in our work to now have this language and this vocabulary talking about earthly stewardship. So before that General Conference talk in October of 2022, we're kind of relying on these terms that have maybe been politicized and might be controversial, but these are eternal principles. We've been instructed and counseled to be earthly stewards since the very beginning. And Elder Caussé did a good job talking about the term dominion, which appears in Genesis and in the Holy Scriptures, and how we can better understand that word. So I was very pleased to be there. And I would invite everyone to find the full text of Elder Caussé's remarks on the Church News website. You can also find a news summary of that event as well.
And we'll link those in the show notes. That event was incredible. It really filled my cup to be there.
Yeah. Again, check out that talk, and thank you for having me on and letting me share my impressions from that great event.
Yeah, thank you so much.
That was amazing. It's heartening to hear that. And it's heartening to hear in particular that 8th part of their mission is, or pillar of the mission was added there. And I think that that's a good example of the church trying to lead out and saying we need to cut through the noise and get over things that maybe in certain contexts, like our North American context, are polarizing or politicizing of an issue that it really affects everyone. And it's part of the tenet of our faith to care for the earth and care for each other. So I really love that. And that is a big priority of our guest today, Katharine Hayhoe. Katharine Hayhoe is the chief scientist for the Nature Conservancy. She's a Paul Whitfield Horn Distinguished Professor and an endowed chair in public policy and public law at the Texas Tech University Department of Political Science. Say that 3 times fast. Dr. Hayhoe received her PhD from the University of Illinois. She's an acclaimed researcher and science communicator known for her outreach to faith communities. In 2014, Dr. Hayhoe was named one of Time magazine's 100 most influential people. In 2017, she was named one of Fortune magazine's top 50 world leaders. Her awards and honors are too numerous to mention, of course, but we want to say that she is also a committed evangelical Christian, and we're going to talk a little bit about that today. Her husband, Pastor Andrew Farley, and she co-authored a book, A Climate for Change, Global Warming Facts for Faith-Based Decisions. And her most recent book, Saving Us, A Climate Scientist's Case for Hope and Healing in a Divided World, is one of my favorites of the past few years. And more recently, she's launched a podcast, which I'm sure we'll chat about a little bit as well. It's called Talking Climate with Katharine Hayhoe. Welcome, Katharine.
Thank you for having me.
So good to have you here.
Oh, absolutely. And it's so fun to follow up on the update from Bremen on what is actually happening, not just at BYU, but in the church. There's just so much going on. And that's one of the most important things I think we all need to know, that we're not alone, that action is happening. And this is such a wonderful example of that.
Totally. Thank you. Well, we'd love to just start with kind of hearing your journey. What led you to become a climate scientist, and what role has your faith played in that?
Mm-hmm. Well, my faith is why I'm a climate scientist. And as Bremen was talking about, it's theology that actually drives this perspective, not ideology or science. So, in the Bible in Genesis 1, it says God gave humans responsibility over every living thing. And we often think of every living thing as including plants and animals, which it does, but every living thing is also us. We have a responsibility to care for our sisters and brothers who live beside us or who live on the other side of the world. And Jesus repeated again and again how we're to be recognized by our love for others, how we're to care for others. And so this is really at the core of the Christian faith, is having that responsibility to love and care for all living things, because what science shows us is that nature doesn't need us. So plants and animals, that part of the living nature, if we disappeared, they'd be fine. But if they all disappeared, we would not be fine. We would have maybe hours left, maybe a day if we're lucky. So it really is, God in his wisdom has created us to be completely dependent on the other aspects of creation. So caring for those other aspects are not somehow altruistic, like, oh, well, I really care about people, but I'll do some, care of nature over here on the side. It's actually a fundamental aspect of who we are, our God-given role, and the necessity of what we have to be doing to ensure a livable home for all of us in the future. So that is why I became a climate scientist, when I realized that climate change is already affecting us now. It's not a future issue. But even more, it is disproportionately affecting those who have done the least to contribute to the problem. So obviously, it's affecting animals and plants, and they've done nothing to contribute to the problem. But even worse, when you talk about people, it's affecting people who are poor and vulnerable, who do not have a safe place to live. They don't have clean water coming out of the tap. They might not have a tap to begin with. They can't afford food, basic health care, education. And those are the people who are most impacted by the way climate change is supersizing our extreme weather events or changing rainfall patterns, affecting crop production. The richest 1% of people in the world produce double the carbon emissions of the poorest 50%. And that's not fair. So for me, as a Christian, when I realized how unfair this was and how the very people Jesus tells us to care for and protect the most, the poor, the widows, children, are most impacted, that's what made me become a climate scientist. So it really is an issue of faith, not of politics, not of ideology, not even of science. It's an issue of what do we believe in our hearts to be right and true, and therefore, how should we act based on that?
Hmm. I think we would be remiss, too, not to say that not just a climate scientist, but one of the world's leading climate experts here. And we would be remiss not to hear about both of those perspectives of how, you just said it so beautifully, of how faith is really the driver of everything that you're putting there. But also, we need to bring in a little, I want to drill in a little bit more on some of the things you said there, because I think sometimes people don't realize that they think they have this psychological distance between climate change as a futuristic or a far-off thing. So tell us a little bit more about that. What do our listeners need to know about what's happening to the Earth's climate, and what's our current situation look like?
Oh, you are totally right. When we look at data in the United States and around the world, the majority of people are actually worried about what's happening, because we can see that the snowfall is changing. We can see that hot summers are becoming more frequent. We can see that wildfires are burning greater area. We can see all this happening. And we agree that it's going to affect future generations and people who live in developing countries, and it's going to affect plants and animals. But then when we ask, do you think it will affect you? The numbers drop. And I think of this as the head to heart gap. Or as you said, it's also what scientists call psychological distance. We say, sure, it's real, but it's not going to affect me now. The reality is it is already affecting us now. And so rather than talking about it in these abstract and future and distant terms, talking about the ice sheets and the polar bears, or talking about what's going to happen in 2050, or what's happening on the other side of the world, let's talk about what's happening in Utah. Let's talk about how a huge part of Utah's economy depends on winter tourism. And let's talk about how climate change is affecting the snowpack, when it falls and how long it stays in Utah. Let's talk about how it's affecting water resources. Let's talk about how it's affecting the air that people are breathing and the insurance rates that people are paying on their homes and the costs that they're paying for food. Those are the types of things we need to talk about to close what I think of as the head to heart gap.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the fact that we have a perfect example of that in Utah, right? This year, the ski resorts in northern Utah, at least, not going to be opening on their normal dates. And I know that that gets to a more complicated thing where people always talk about, oh, well, weather and climate, there's a difference there, people, and things like that. But the trends seem to be that the change has been happening year over year, even when you have adverse events that give us a bunch of snow, or even when you get an abnormally dry year and then it's followed up by another wet year. That's another interesting thing to think about. Like if I talk about that in conversation with somebody here, what does that look like? Hey, did you notice that the ski resorts are opening later this year? Must be climate change.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a good example, and you're totally right. We have weather and we have climate. So the way I think about it is, we always have wet and dry years. That's just part of our normal variability. Wet and dry, wet and dry. But as the world gets warmer, it's like it's stretching this pattern in both directions. So our really wet events are actually getting wetter. And our droughts and dry periods are getting longer and more intense at the same time. And that's because we're just getting stretched. And then over top of that change in extremes, as the hydrological cycle's speeding up, the whole situation is just getting more extreme. It's like it doesn't rain, but it pours. And then you have a drought. In addition, we have this long-term warming trend superimposed on that. And with wet and dry, the temperature when that rain falls determines whether it's rain or snow. And what we see is that year by year by year, there are more days above freezing. So one year you could have a bunch of wet days when it's below freezing. So you get wonderful snowpack. But the chances of a day below freezing when you're going to get the precipitation are going down over time. And so what we're seeing is we're seeing more rain days. We're seeing more rain on snow days. We're seeing more years when the resorts have to open later, although sometimes they open on time and once in a while they might even open early. But on average, the ski season is shrinking. And that's affecting not just winter tourism, but it's also affecting water supply and ecosystems and all kinds of knock-on effects. Yeah. I know. I'm a winter person, so it makes me very sad.
Yeah, no, it's so important. And I'm just thinking about this paradigm shift that I experienced reading your book, and that is being reinforced right now, from climate change being this really nebulous, faraway thing to being, oh, this is something that is affecting me. And also that makes it feel like there's, things that we can do. And we'll get more to the practical actions later. But right now I'm thinking about other people and how we can kind of help them experience this paradigm shift too. And it's a tricky thing to approach. You kind of have this expertise, not in just talking to people about climate change, but specifically talking to religious people. A lot of our listeners kind of come from this culture too, where a lot of religious conservatives have grown up maybe in a culture of feeling like climate change is not either it's not a real thing or it's an intensely politicized thing. And so there's kind of this fear of talking about it. So what are some of your tips? You have some great tips in your book. We'd love to hear what are some of the ways that we can make that connection with people who just initially have that like, oh, this is not a thing I want to talk about, even though it is so directly impacting them.
You're totally right. And in fact, let me just give you some numbers. So if we look at Utah, for example, and again, the numbers we see in Utah are very similar to numbers we see across the whole US and even around the world. If you go to Utah and you say, is global warming happening? 69% of people in Utah would just say yes right away. 69. I mean, that's a lot. That's more than 2/3 of people. And then if you ask people, are you worried about it? 59% would say they're worried. That's a pretty large number. But then if you go and you ask them, do you ever talk about it? 34% say they talk about it once in a while. So that's why this is so important, because as humans, if we don't talk about something, why would we care? And if we don't care, why would we ever do anything about it? The way that we do anything together as humans, and when it comes to issues like climate change, we can't fix them individually, but we can definitely fix them working together. What's the first step? The first step is just to talk about it, right? And I think that that's something that we learn from being part of a church, because the Christian faith is not one where you go off by yourself as a hermit like they used to in the Middle Ages. We don't have a lot of hermits anymore. How we practice our faith is by getting together with other people and talking about what we believe and why we believe it and how that plays out with our lives, right? So we already practice that. And we know that that's essential to living out our values and making choices that are consistent with who we believe ourselves to be. So if we're not talking about, again, the heart being how climate change is affecting the people and places and things we love, if we're not talking about that, how are we supposed to work together in whatever organization we're part of, whether it's the town that we live in or the school that we attend or the ultimate Frisbee team that we're part of or the church that we attend or the ski club that we're part of or whoever it is that we're part of? It all begins with that conversation, and we're not doing it. So why are we not doing it? We're not doing it often. And I ask people this, why not? And so I have a pretty good idea of why not. First of all, people say, well, I'm not a scientist. And I'm like, well, you know what? Being a scientist actually works against you, not for you. Because, and Phil, you're in here too, because we know so much in our heads, right? We have all the stats and facts and figures in our heads, but people don't need more stuff in their heads. They need the heart connection. So we need to begin our conversation not with the stats and the facts and the figures, but research actually shows that the best people to have climate conversations, the most effective conversations, are with someone you know and you share something with. So sure, I am very effective at having conversations with other scientists who know all the data, but if I would have much better success having conversations with people if I'm a mother and I'm talking to somebody else who's a mother, or if I'm a person who lives in this place and I'm talking to someone else who lives here, or if I'm someone who loves skiing and I'm talking to somebody else who loves skiing, or if I'm somebody who has asthma and who's breathing in that air that's choked with pollution, either blowing in from over the Great Salt Lake or the pollution from the wildfires. And I'm talking to somebody else who has breathing problems too. So starting that conversation with something that we have in common is so important, much more important than bringing in the science. And then something else people say is, well, I'm afraid to have the conversation because it's so depressing. And I'm like, well, yeah, if you're just talking about melting ice sheets and dying polar bears, it's very depressing. But if you talk about not only what you care about, the heart, but you bring in the hands, all of the amazing things that are already happening in the US, in Texas where I live, and around the world, you leave those conversations feeling inspired and energized and motivated to act rather than paralyzed and depressed. So that's why I have this weekly newsletter called Talking Climate. There is an audio version too, so it's a podcast as well, so you can read it or you can listen to it, and you can find Talking Climate just online at talkingclimate.ca. And every week, I share 3 things based on the science of how to help people take action. First of all, I share good news. That's the hands about solutions that are already happening. And who doesn't want to talk about good news? It's so encouraging and exciting to share good news. Then I share not so good news, which is the heart about how climate change is affecting things like fertility rates and bananas and chocolate. And, it's even affecting our insurance rates that we pay on our home. And then I always share something tangible that we can do and that we can encourage others to do too, together when we talk about it. So that's why people often don't talk about it, because they feel like they have to be a scientist or they feel like they have to have a big argument with someone. And I'm like, arguments never changed anybody's mind. If you're going to argue, don't even bother. Or they feel it's going to be too depressing. But I really believe that the best conversations are not depressing, and they don't start with the science. They start with the heart, and then they connect to the hands.
That's so cool. And I'm remembering in your book, you talked about different groups of people and how there is a group of people that maybe are just so opposed to talking about this that maybe you don't worry too much about trying to convince them. But that's a small, small group of people that most people are open to talking about this. And I love that idea of finding something that you share with them. There's a quote that you said in the book that says nearly everyone already has the values they need to care about the future of our world, even if they're not the same as mine or yours. And I think that's such a beautiful idea that almost everyone, besides that tiny little group of people that are just never going to respond, is ready to hear those good news and then maybe a problem that we can work on and then some action-oriented solutions. It still does feel hard. I have a lot of people in my life, and I sometimes lean in this direction, that it feels like when I'm focusing on solving problems, it still feels like I'm somehow feeding energy into negativity. I don't know if that makes sense. I just know a lot of people that are like, I don't want to even talk about solutions to problems. I just want to focus on all the good things that are happening in the world. How do you hold that tension of feeling like we're not just reacting to problems, but we are actively creating good things in the world? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally does. And I think that you have just perfectly articulated why in my Talking Climate newsletter, why I have good news and what you can do together. Like if I just had the not so good news and what you can do, it would be like, okay, well, it's so depressing. You're telling me I have to do all this stuff and I just can't even hold that type of, pressure, anxiety.
Yeah, it feels heavy.
It feels very heavy. And what the social science shows us is that the bad news wakes us up, but it doesn't activate us. It actually makes us almost like want to just go back to bed and pull the covers over our head. So if you're pairing what you can do with the good news of what's already being done. So this is already happening. Those people over there are already doing this. It's already underway or even completed. And so then you feel mentally, it's like, it's the difference between there's this giant boulder of climate action, and we often picture that giant boulder as just at a dead stop. And so if it's at a dead stop, you're asking people to put your hands on it and actually get it moving. And oh my gosh, that is a hard job to get a giant boulder moving. I can't do that by myself. And I feel like, well, so what's the point of putting my hand on it if it's not going to move? But by sharing the good news of the solutions that are already happening, we realize that giant boulder is already moving in the right direction, and it already has millions of hands on it. And if something is moving and I add my hand, even though my hand is just very small, it'll go a little bit faster because it's already moving. So psychologically, I think you need both of those together, because otherwise you feel like I know what I could do, but I still feel like there's no hope. Whereas when you know that solutions are already being implemented, you know there is hope and I can make a difference.
Yeah.
Do you think that that's because people like you said, we often forget the fact that there's a near super majority of people that think that this is something that needs to be addressed, but because so few talk about it, and in particular in faith communities, people, when they come on to this realization, they feel isolated. They feel like, oh, I'm Atlas carrying the globe now, and I'm the only one that can do it because nobody talks about it. So therefore I don't see the boulder already rolling over there, because maybe I'm using a different way of describing the problem or what could be done or what's being done than my fellow neighbor or fellow congregant. That means that they must not believe in it, and that there's not a way to bridge that gap. And so I'm just by myself over here, just little old me. And maybe, I don't know, maybe that's even force multiplied by how online we are and things nowadays. And I don't know. I just wonder what are your thoughts on that? Is that sense of isolation, do you get that often when you're talking to people?
Oh, not only do I get it, but there was a global survey that came out just 6 months ago. Not a US survey, it was global. And what they found globally is that the majority of people care, and the majority of people don't think anybody else cares. Isn't that wild? And the reason for that is because we're not talking about it.
Yeah.
Because, what do you talk about? Normally, we talk about what we care about, right? So normally, like, people are like, oh, well, I know my friends care about X because this is what they talk about, right? But we self-silence on climate change because when we're worried about something, but we don't know what to do about it, most people don't want to talk about stuff like that. There's a few people who do, the Debbie Doomers of the world, who just love running around talking about all the horrible things that are happening in the world. And I'm just like, please stop. I'm not that type of person. You are stressing me out and depressing me.
Sure.
So So there's a few people who do, but most of us don't like talking about stuff when we don't think there's any hope or anything we can do. So people are self-silencing around the world. And as a result, you just totally hit the nail on the head, Phil. Most people think other people don't care. So the Yale program on climate change communication, which they're the ones who have that 6 Americas of global warming that you referred to, Lydia, where there's just 10% of people who are dismissive. And those are the people that you just sort of say, I'm sorry, I love you, now let's talk about something else. But 90% of people are not dismissive. They also have identified 6 key things people need to know about climate change. When they first started, they only had 4. So when they first started, they had, it's real, it's sort of important. It's human caused. We really have checked. It's not natural factors. We should actually be getting cooler according to natural factors right now. And instead, we're getting warmer and warmer. It's serious in the sense that it affects us. It's not just about the future of the planet. It's literally about our lives. And experts agree. The time for debate was back in the 1800s. Nowadays, we're very clear. It's real, it's us, and it's serious. But then they realized that those 4 truths wake people up and make them aware, but they don't cause people to act. They actually found that even though in the US now, 28% of people are concerned and 26% are alarmed, but they found only 8% are activated. So then they went back to the drawing board and they're like, okay, so the majority of people know it's real, it's human caused, it's serious, and experts agree, but they're not activated. Why not? They discovered we have to know 2 more things. We have to know that others care. If we don't think others care, we won't do anything. And they just added that to the list just this year. And then the other thing that we have to know is that there is hope in the sense that there are solutions and solutions work. That's what they define as hope, which I love. So though the first 4 wake us up, but then if we don't know that others care and there are solutions and they work and there's hope, we're not going to act. So that's what we need to share with people. It's so brilliantly simple, isn't it?
That's incredible. My heart feels full of hope just hearing you talk about that. And we'd love to actually hear some examples of some of the incredible things happening that people should be aware of that might create some hope for them.
Sure. I would love to do that. I'm just going to run down a few of the things that I've shared in Talking Climate because it's really my practice of hope. Every week I go out, I look for hopeful information, and then I share it. And I started doing it 3 years ago. Just like I said, it was my own personal practice of hope. And then people kept asking me for this. So I was like, okay, I'll just make a newsletter and you can subscribe if you want. And now there's people in 181 countries that subscribe to Talking Climate. So that alone is this incredible piece of hope. Yes. So a couple of weeks ago, there was a terrible hurricane that hit Jamaica. And we know it was supersized by climate change. And we know that one of the worst things that hurricanes do is they knock out the power grid, and then people don't have access to electricity for everything from keeping their food safe to powering hospitals and health equipment and things like that. Well, what we found in Jamaica is people who had solar energy, most of that didn't get knocked out. So the people in the community who had solar panels, especially if they had storage to go with it, they're acting as a hub for people in the community to come together to charge their phones, to get electricity, to stay in contact with people, to be able to store food and more. And when we look around the world, the renewable energy race is just accelerating like crazy. So I'm from Canada, and last year, the country of Pakistan installed more solar in a single year than Canada has in its entire history.
Wow.
And year on year, the last couple of years, China has installed more solar energy every year than the US has in its entire history. Those are some pieces of good news that most people do not know.
Yeah.
So those are sort of big picture scale. And there's one more really important one. We're talking now just after the big climate conference in Brazil, where the world comes together to talk about implementation of the Paris Agreement that was signed in 2015. And people often say, well, what happened since 2015? Not much, right? No, actually, we have almost halved the projected warming by end of century, thanks to actions taken since the Paris Agreement was signed 10 years ago. Nobody knows that. And then if I may, let me just offer some very small examples too, because those are like really big examples. The first wind-powered cargo ship is crossing the Atlantic this week, which is super cool. We know that when you green cities, not only does it keep them cool during heat waves and provide flood protection, but it also helps with our health. At the Nature Conservancy, we finished the first clinical trial of nature where we worked with a medical school, and we helped a low-income neighborhood green their neighborhood. And the medical school measured measures of inflammation in people's bodies. And it turned out that their inflammation indicators, which cause everything from mental health issues to physical health issues, dropped significantly after their neighborhood was greened. I mean, all of these things are just such good news. Mhm.
Whoa. Okay, there's a number of things I want to unpack there.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so first of all, the halving. That's really significant, and I mean, maybe it is in the. Admittedly, I haven't been checking a lot of the news on COP lately, but I need to really get up on that. But so we're talking about having what was going to be, if you just stayed status quo, this is how much the planet would warm by the end of the century. And now it's halved into, if we do nothing else from here on out, we still have halved the amount that we would warm. Is that what I'm hearing?
Exactly. So we were headed in 2015, we were headed to a 4 to 5 degrees C warmer world. And to translate that into Fahrenheit, it's about 7 to 9 degrees Fahrenheit. And
I see you, northern neighbor. Thanks for the clarification for the Americans.
And the rest of the world,
.ca.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. The rest of the world. That's right. We need to get on board here.
And people might say, well, why does that matter? You know, it's going to be warmer or cooler by that much tomorrow compared to today. But the average temperature of the planet is as stable as the temperature of our human body. So our body temperature goes up and down by a few tenths of a degree every day, and that's totally normal, totally natural. The planet's average temperature goes up and down by a few tenths of a degree over the course of human civilization, and that's totally normal and natural. But imagine if we were running a 2-degree Fahrenheit fever, which is what our planet is currently running. You'd feel achy, you'd be taking Tylenol, you'd be going to the doctor, you'd be wondering who breathed on you or what you ate. That's where the planet is now. And if you're running a 7 to 9 degree fever, it is life-threatening. You are in the hospital. You're likely on life support at that point. So we have actually, that was where we were headed to by the end of the century, just 10 years ago. And now, with current pledges that are already in place, we're headed to 2.8. And if the promises that have been made are fully implemented, we're headed to 2.3 to 2.5. So that's what I mean when I say it's almost halved. Now, of course, you know, if you're running a fever of 2.5, that's 4 degrees Fahrenheit. That's still pretty high fever. You know, that's 102, but it's a lot better than 105 or higher. So that's incredibly good news that we've already made so much progress in 10 years. And doesn't it give you hope that we could make more in the next 10?
Absolutely. Well, especially given what you just said earlier of the snowball effect, right? If somebody sees that something's already rolling, that snowball is going down the hill, let's join in and roll it faster. It's a force multiplier. You can, all of a sudden, things can be nonlinear, exponential, you know? That's really, really striking. I love that. Okay, sorry. And I just have one other clarification that I wanted to. That we could do this all day. Sorry, I'm like nerding out here a little bit. The other one was the green space. This is near and dear to my heart thing since I'm a landscape architect, but they measured, was this longitudinally over time, people's inflammation from before installation to how it's grown over the years? Because this landscape, I assume, is probably not even fully mature yet either at this point.
It is not. And then what they did was they also had a control neighborhood.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So they measured so what they did was well, first of all, let's back up. Low-income neighborhoods in the U.S. and in most other big cities around the world typically have a lot less green space than higher-income neighborhoods. They have a lot of concrete area. And so during heat waves in the U.S., those neighborhoods can be up to 15 degrees Fahrenheit hotter than a high-income neighborhood in the same city. So imagine the impact on people's air conditioning bills, on their health. I mean, it's just It's just hard to believe the big difference it has. And that is often because of historic racist redlining practices. They just didn't, the cities didn't invest in creating the parks and the green spaces in those lower income neighborhoods. People's land plots are smaller too, and things like that. So not only that, but a lot of those neighborhoods, the pollution levels are a lot higher. Right? Because they're typically located in less desirable areas like near big freeways or industrial areas because they don't have the political clout to prevent them, and the property prices are lower. And often they're more likely to be located in flood zones because, again, that's cheaper, a cheaper place to live. So when you green these neighborhoods, first of all, you're providing more absorptive capacity. So when there's heavy rain, there's less flooding. You're providing green canopy, so when there's heat waves, it's a lot cooler. You're providing all that vegetation to filter the air pollution out of the air. And if I had to guess, I would bet that that was the biggest factor in lowering their inflammation levels. And you're also providing habitat for biodiversity. Oh, and as the trees grow, they take up carbon, so they're also a climate solution. I mean, you need almost all your fingers to count the benefits. So with this experiment in Louisville, Kentucky, the Nature Conservancy partnered with the medical school there and with this neighborhood. So they measured the inflammation levels in people's blood, and then they worked with the neighborhood to green it. And I can't quite recall, but I think by the time they had finished the project, maybe 2 years later, I think there was a 15% drop in their inflammation levels in that neighborhood that have been greened, but obviously you want to control too to make sure that there's not other factors going on, and there was not a similar change in the control neighborhood. So, that's such an amazing win-win-win, isn't it? Because people might not want to do it for climate reasons, but they want to do it for health reasons, or they might want to do it to save money on air conditioning reasons, or they might want to do it for nature and biodiversity. And it helps with all of them. You don't have to argue over which solution is best. You just have this amazing coalition of people who care about maybe 10 different things, but you're all working on the same solution together.
I'm going to have to sit with that for a moment. That's great. I love hearing these things. Jeez.
There's if you're interested, there's a really good book called The Nature of Our Cities that goes very into the details of nature and cities and how our health is intimately tied to it.
Okay, well, I feel like we've kind of just been moving through your model of bad news, good news. And so that means the next step is to talk about actions that we can take. What are some of the most effective, most accessible actions that listeners could take to start being a part of the solution?
I think this is the most important question. And I am really happy that this is now the most common question I get. So back before I wrote Saving Us, the most frequent question I would get is, what gives you hope? And so that's why I wrote Saving Us, to talk about how action gives us hope. But now the most common question I get is not that. It's, what can I do? Which is awesome. That's exactly the right question to be asking. So that's the hands question. So often when we think of what to do, we live in such an individualistic society that we immediately are jumping to what we can do in our personal individual lives to reduce our personal carbon footprint. And first of all, don't get me wrong, if we live in North America, per person, we have a pretty high footprint. Much higher, sometimes 10 or even 20 times higher than somebody living in a low-income country in Africa or the Middle East or Southeast Asia. So our choices are disproportionately impactful, our daily day-to-day life choices, than if we lived a very low-energy lifestyle in a low-income country. But even still, our personal choices are not enough. So as Bill McKibben says, Bill is somebody else who is a climate advocate because of his faith. He says, the most important thing an individual can do right now is not be such an individual. And to me, that really reminds me of the model that we're given in the Bible of the church as a body. That the church is not this collection of individual minions, that are just supposed to run around and do things individually. We're told that we're a body, and each of us is literally a different part of a body. And what makes a body so unique is that it needs a liver and a nervous system and skin and toes and eyes and hair. It needs all these different parts. But each of these different parts are not effective by themselves. They have to be connected to the other parts to be effective. And this is really a model for climate action. Because each of us have different talents, different abilities, different skills, different gifts, we believe. And when we combine those together, we can accomplish so much more. So what Bill is saying is that the most important thing an individual can do right now is make sure that we're working with others together to affect change that can be many times greater than what we could affect individually. And so if you go to my Instagram account or my Threads account or my Blue Sky account, I have pinned to the top of each of those accounts a science-based list of the 6 most important things that an individual can do. And many people would assume I'm going to be talking about our carbon footprint, but I'm not. Because the most important things we can do don't actually have anything to do with our personal carbon footprint. They're about making the easiest and most affordable choice for everyone the best choice. So, if you have to get from where you are to downtown, the fastest and easiest way and the most affordable way is to take public transportation or to bike. Or if you have to go to the store, the easiest way to get there is actually to walk. And if you want to drive, you can, but it's a lot easier to find a place to plug in your car than it is to find a gas station. When we get to a world like that, it's like that giant boulder of climate action. It's going to be rolling down the hill all by itself. So how do we get to that type of world? Number one, start a conversation about why climate change matters, the heart, and what we can do, the hands. Number two, join a climate action group to help amplify or magnify your voice. And so that's what you have with the LDS Stewardship group, right? You have a way for people to come together who have shared values, shared experience, and amplify their voice. Number three, consider where you keep your money. We can often speak very loudly with the bank that we choose, with the retirement plan that we choose. Even $1,000 in a bank that invests in oil and gas produces the equivalent emissions of flying from New York to Seattle every year, which is crazy. Then hold politicians accountable. And that doesn't just mean voting, it means having conversations with people who make decisions for your city, for your county, for your ward, for the place that you work. Have conversations about, again, why it matters and what you can do. And then the last one is reduce your personal footprint. Do take actions in your personal life to reduce your personal footprint. So for example, I get all my energy from a wind-powered company. I had no car at all for 2 years, but we just got a plug-in EV. I try out new plant-based recipes. I've taken plastic out of my laundry room. I buy secondhand clothing, and I love doing that. It's also much more affordable, too. But don't just make those changes yourself personally. Talk about them to make them contagious, to spread them to other people. So those are the 6 most important things that we can do. And when we do those, we ourselves are catalyzing change in what I think of as not our carbon footprint, but our climate shadow. All of the connections that we have around us, that's how we as individuals change society.
That's incredible. I feel so lit up. I feel like I keep saying that during this conversation. It sounds so obvious, but I've never thought about the metaphor of the body of Christ as highlighting our need to be connected to each other. I think we talk about it so much as like, it's good that you're unique. And I think that is a part of it, that we do each have an individual different role to play. But a body is not a box of organs sitting in their own little section. We are all connected and we have to be connected. And what a cool paradigm shift to say the most important thing you can do as an individual who cares about the earth is to join hands with other people and work together. So, so incredible.
I thought about that same exact thing too. We're on the same wavelength there, Lydia, because I was thinking that it's the connections of the body as a system makes it greater than the sum of its parts.
Yeah.
And there's every group, every person is individual and complex, and they create more complexity in the system. But when those connections are strong, then that all still works towards a common goal, helping this body survive and thrive and do good. Oh, man, I love that. I love that so much.
Well, I think we're coming up on time. So are there any other thoughts that you want to share before we wrap up?
I would just summarize what we've been talking about by saying that whoever we are, we have every reason to care about these challenges that stand between us and a better future. And for those of us whose lives are formed and shaped by our faith, how much more do we have? if we really believe that God has given us responsibility to care for each other, as well as every living thing on this earth, if we really believe that we have had God's love poured out in our hearts to share with others, then what does that mean other than we will be at the front of the line demanding climate action? So my favorite Bible verse has nothing to do with nature, nothing to do with, the universe or plants or animals or anything like that or the earth. My favorite Bible verse, which I think relates directly to what we're talking about today, is where Paul is writing to Timothy and he says, God has not given us a spirit of fear. And so much of the discussion around climate change revolves around fear. There's fear about the apocalyptic scenarios we want to avoid, but there's also a lot of fear among those who don't want to act and who reject the reality of this problem. They're afraid of what they will lose by saying, yes, it's real and we do want to change. Whenever we see fear, God hasn't given us that fear. Instead, what that verse goes on to say is that God has given us a spirit of power, which is a bit of an old-fashioned way of saying that we can act. Fear paralyzes us. But if we are empowered, that means we actually can act. And then with love, which means that we can consider others' needs, not just our own. And the last part is, and with a sound mind to make good decisions. And that's where the science comes in, right? Good decisions based on the information that God has given us through observing the world around us. So we have not been given a spirit of fear, but a spirit of power, love, and a sound mind. And those are all the gifts that we need to come together to address these issues that stand between all of us and a better future.
Amen. That is so beautiful.
Notes for my journal tonight. My goodness, that's amazing.
Yeah. Let's go to our last 3 questions. I think our first one is kind of what we already talked about, which is what can our listeners start doing today that will bless the earth? I think we kind of covered that one. So maybe we go on to the next one, Phil.
Oh, yeah. And I would just say, when we have these conversations, it's not just about blessing the earth, but we have to understand the earth is our home. So we're
Yes.
blessing each other and
Yep.
ourselves by doing so. It's not like people or the planet. The planet will be going around the sun long after we're gone. The question is the people, what's going to happen to us? So just having that perspective too, I think is so important. Mhm.
People are part of the planet. I was thinking about it earlier. Actually, I forgot to mention that I like that you try to dispel that sort of nature-human binary of like we are separate from each other and that there's not symbiosis in any way of those things. That's really important to point out. I love that. Okay, so the other 2 questions that we have for you. The first is, where was the last place that you felt a sense of awe and wonder?
Oh, it's always in nature. So I have felt awe and wonder so many places, but this summer I got the chance to finally go to Banff, which is in the province of Alberta, and it is seriously the most beautiful place I've ever been. Every corner you turn around, whether you're on the Icefields Parkway or you're on a hiking trail, every single corner you're like, oh my goodness, this is now the most beautiful view I've ever seen in my life. And then you turn another corner and you're like, no, this is the most beautiful view I've ever seen in my life. And it is just incredible that there are just these just awe-inspiring, majestic landscapes that for many years hardly anyone saw. And then when you translate that into our universe, I said, I actually began my career originally in astrophysics, studying the universe. And every decade we get more and more powerful telescopes. And with those, we can see further and further into the universe. And every time we do that, we can actually see things that nobody has ever seen before except God. And I mean, the sense of awe that inspires too is just incredible. God is an artist and made all these amazing things basically just because he's an artist and it's his pleasure. And some of those things we will never see. And some of those things we are seeing for the very first time now. And so from the landscapes of Earth to the far reaches of the universe, God's creation is just incredible. And the fact that there's such beauty in it, but he also so mindfully created a perfect home for us that gives us everything we could ever need. How incredible is that? And how much more important is it that we be good stewards of this incredible gift he's given us for each other, for future generations, and for the creation that he loves.
So what I'm hearing there is I need to go and get the most powerful telescope I have and bring it to Banff.
Yes, that's
and then I will have the ultimate.
That's right.
Beautiful. Okay, and then our last question is, how has your commitment to this work brought you closer to God?
Oh, when I first started doing this, I was motivated by my faith, but I still sort of had that perspective that we often have that reading the Bible or going to church or being part of a Bible study or something like that, like those are like the spiritual things, or being a missionary, for example. I actually grew up as a missionary kid myself in South America. So you're like, okay, those are the spiritual things, and then there's all the other things, right?
Yeah.
But what I've really realized is in doing this work, I am walking in the good works that God has prepared for me in advance. And so when there are difficult situations, which there always are in this area, and when there's difficult choices to be made, just knowing that I can really trust him because I'm doing the work that he wants me to do, and I don't need to see 5 steps ahead. I only need to see the next step. And so that has just really been a tremendous source of encouragement and growth to me.
That's so beautiful. An act of
Uh-huh.
faith.
Katharine, thank you so much for coming on. We really, really appreciate having you here. This has been amazing. I wish we could go for 3 more hours because there's so much to talk about. We really, really appreciate your time. And you've mentioned it earlier in the episode, but I want to mention again, we are going to light up the show notes with all the links to the things that you've mentioned. Find Katharine on Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, X, all the things. Talkingclimate.ca was the website, correct? And then a recorded version of it in a podcast. We really highly encourage our listeners to go check that out. And all of the other many fun things I think that exist on that website. We are so happy to have had you, and we hope that this is not the first and last, but the first of many that we might engage.
I hope so too. Thank you for having me.
Wow. I'm going to be riding that high for a while.
I am lit up right now. That's awesome.
Yeah, I can't wait to just like practice, just kind of try out like, okay, how do I talk to my roommates about this, my family? I'm excited to put some of those ideas into practice. So,
Oh, man. Absolutely. Okay. Do we have audience feedback?
yeah, we do. So, we got a comment from Lori Cartwright, who is the Utah director for MWEG, Mormon Women for Ethical Government. We're huge fans of them. She commented on episode 4 where we had Sharon Eubank, and she said, I'm loving this podcast. Every episode is 100 underline emoji, which is
Hey.
so kind. We adore MWEG. They're an incredible partner organization. They focus a lot on caring for the environment, and they have their own podcast called Proclaim Peace, which we're huge fans of. So thank you, Lori.
Huge fans. We work with MWEG on many different things usually throughout the year and are always grateful to have such great friends and companions in the work. So a thank you emoji back. Pray hands emoji back.
Yeah, totally. Well, we'd love to hear from all of you and help create a community where we can support each other as Earth stewards. So please reach out to us by commenting on YouTube or Spotify or emailing us at hello@holyearthpodcast.com. And if this content is resonating with you or you find it useful, subscribe to our feed on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or TikTok at Holy Earth Podcast.
And if you would like to get involved with Latter-day Saint Earth Stewardship, visit our website at ldsearthstewardship.org and sign up for our newsletter.
Holy Earth is brought to you by Latter-day Saint Earth Stewardship, a 501c3 nonprofit whose mission is to honor God by learning and living Latter-day Saint principles of creation care, and with the support of a generous donation from the Nature Conservancy. Our executive producer is Mike Maxwell, and our producer is Marcia Maxwell. Our theme music was composed and performed by Lydia Theobald. Our logo and graphic design are by Annie Peterson. Our social media coordinator is Chloe Miss.